Welcome to today's video. Today I'm embarking on a bit of a time capsule adventure. Back about a year ago when I was on the Hudson Valley Yarn Trail, I found a sweater kit that was sold for a pretty good price. I forget the exact price now, but I remember thinking like it was cheap. So this is the kit. It is a S&C Huber American Classic kit, and it's a sweater kit. You can probably tell from the packaging that this is not a modern kit. I forget why I had this number stuck in my head, but I believe this is from the 70s. I may have been told it was from the 70s. I have no idea if this kit has been untouched or not because of a couple things. One is you can see the cellophane here is ripped. So something happened that caused that to rip. And then the other thing is there is Scotch tape that's on it. From the layers of dust on the Scotch tape, I am not the person who put that there because I've only had this in my possession for a year. The dust that's on it is definitely more than a year old. Now you may be wondering, hey Becky, if you had this kit for a year, why are you still holding on to it? And it's like, have you seen my yarn spending habits? I can buy yarn a lot faster than I can use it up. It's not that I haven't been knitting, I've been working through my stash, but there's still a lot of stash to go through. It's like I've gone on 4 yarn crawls. I can just tell from the packaging alone this cardboard box that this is not the type of cardboard packaging that would be made nowadays, if only for the fact that there's no QR code on it. But it's very rare to find a vintage kit because most of the time when you go into a local yarn store, there are kits, but they're all like brand new. This is from S&C Huber American Classics. It says that S&C Huber American Classics is a center for designing and producing sweaters based on country and folk art motifs. It is our very own mom and pop concept, which we operate from our small 17th century Connecticut farm. Antique dealers by trade, specializing in 18th century textiles and vitally interested in historical preservation, we decided a few years ago that there was a definite need for Americana folk art designs. We created a few patterns and had tremendous response from you, the knitters. Such encouragement has led to more and more designs and a bigger and even better response. One of our barns has been turned to a workshops studio packaging center. Another, a warehouse for the tonnage of yarn is delivered in huge bags and goes back out in kit form. Our hobby has grown into a full-time venture for both of us. Several people have been employed and kits and books are being sent all over the world. We're constantly working on new designs, kits and books, which we hope you will knit, wear, and love for many seasons to come, just as you will this American classic. And then on the other side, there is an address that's in Connecticut. I've never heard of S.C. Huber before I came across this in the store. I've been to a lot of yarn stores, not necessarily in Connecticut, although I have been to a yarn store in Connecticut, but a fair amount of those are in like the New York, New England area. I've also been part of the yarn community on social media for over a year now, so I feel like if this company was still in business, they would have popped up on my feed at some point. They could have popped up on my feed and I just didn't know because they changed their logo to keep up with the changing times. But especially since they say that they operate from a small 17th century Connecticut farm, smaller businesses like that, unless they passed it off to the kids or someone else took over, I think the chance is incredibly likely that someone either sold off the farm when the original owners died, or they went through a merger and changed names. And I could still be interacting with them and have no idea. But especially since the way it's described as mom and pop concept leads me to think married couple. It seems less that they produce their own yarn because it says the yarn is delivered. And it seems, especially with the more antique dealers and creating the patterns, it seems like their business model was more create the patterns and then put together kits, but not selling yarn individually. So that's definitely something that I need to research more. I mean, I'm just talking off of the assumptions that are coming, which is quite likely to make me sound like an ass, but that is a chance I'm willing to take in this particular endeavor. On the other side of the box, it says that this kit includes all the yarn and graph paper needed to complete the sweater illustrated. So there's only one sweater. If an adult size, this will make a garment up to 42 inches. Children's kits have sizes indicated. We have also enclosed a woven label for your finished sweater. Additional yarn is available from S&C Huber. Oh, I guess they do sell yarn by itself then. I guess I ate my words like less than a minute later. So our designs are easy to knit, most only in stockinette stitch. The gauge works up quickly and the graph's easy to follow. The yarn in this kit is either 100% wool or cotton as indicated. You have taken special care to bring you the highest quality yarn in the best possible color combinations for your sweater. We feel that these designs and your efforts are creating sweaters that will become much loved family heirlooms. For more information on our pattern book kits and hand knit sweaters, send in the coupon on the flap. This is pre-internet. Like if this was a box that's here today's, it'd be like, scan this QR code or visit our website, follow us on Facebook, things like that. And then on the back here, they have a bunch of blurbs. They have 6 different compliments on the back for all the different people who love their sweaters, and has a little peek through of the yarn here. I can tell just from looking at it that this is a wool sweater, and it looks like it's already caked for me, which means it will be easy to just get up and start working with it. When I start working with this yarn, like part of exploring this kit will be seeing if the materials are viable to use or if I'll have to replace them. It's kind of like experimenting with the wool. I can't necessarily say that it's their fault that the wool is bad quality, because yarn does change over time. The quality of the yarn can be affected by how the yarn is stored and how it's treated. Especially if yarn's stored in like a tight position, it can make it harder for the yarn to act the way it should. You also notice this phenomenon a lot with acrylic as well. The acrylic that is like over 20 years old is a lot rougher than the acrylic that is made today. Part of it is how they made the yarn, but also part of it is just how the yarn aged. So if this yarn is not the best quality, I'm not going to be terribly upset. I've got more than enough wool that I could probably find enough yarns to replace it, although it'll be a crazier looking sweater if I do. I think for this one, the main thing is going to be, are all the parts still included? Or did someone open this up at some point? So this is the sweater. The blurbs are talking about another sweater called a goose sweater, but this one's called the Girl in Flowers crew neck pullover. It looks like it's all stockinette except for like the ribbing on the cuffs, which is pretty normal. The color work's intense with this baby, yeah? This is some pretty intense color work. I have theories for how I think the sweater is going to build up. I think it's a bottom up sweater. I don't think it's a top down. I think it's a bottom up because the shoulders are very squared. With the sleeves, either the sleeves are sewn on, which I think is less likely. They could be set in, or this could be like a Lopa Pesa sweater where you make everything up until that point, like the body and then the 2 sleeves, and then you connect them all that way. But the way that this is squared at the top makes me think that the sleeves are a little bit more set in. Also, I am 99.9999999% certain that the front and back are made at the same time, because if you look here, there's no seam. The color work just kind of folds over at that point. So I fully expect to be done with this sweater in a couple months, especially if it's all stockinette. I can do stockinette pretty quickly. I know from experience that if I really put my mind to it, that I could finish a sweater in a week. But it does look like, if I had to guess, I would guess this is anywhere from US size 4 to size 8 needles that this was made with. So we are going to open this up for the first time. Ooh, now that I have talked your ear off about what my expectations for this are. Ha! All right. So here we have our little tag that gets sewn into the sweater afterwards. My sensory sensitive self is not likely to put that in there. I have this weird thing that I don't like using sewing thread combined with yarn. It's like splitting the yarn with sewing threads, like, ugh. And that's likely to happen with this. But it's nice that they include it and like they have it right there. And this is the coupon that you send for our color catalog of additional kits and pattern books. It'd be interesting to send that in just to see what happens. But honestly, I'd probably get a quicker answer if I just went to the website and found out. So we have the yarn. The first thing that like pops out to me is that the yarn is in different sizes. The yarn has different size cakes because this is a blue. Ooh, that's got a musty smell. Automatically looking at it, this strikes me as a DK weight. Maybe fingering. No, it's a little bit thicker than fingering, but it's like DK weight. Smells like a dusty attic. It's a rough yarn. Where's the test? Oh, you see that? Look at, I barely expended effort. I barely expended effort for that. This is the wool equivalent of that old acrylic yarn. The yarn's gotten weak, y'all. So you have like this light blue. Here's this other blue. This is like a darker blue. They're not, yeah, they are definitely different colors. Then we got this salmon-y color. It's a very nice color. Guess this is more, yeah, okay. I think I need to show you with today's yarn. You saw how easily that came apart? So this is acrylic today, like acrylic made today. You see how much I have to like pull on it? Ugh. Like this is expending a lot of effort, and wool is softer than acrylic. This is relatively tighter ply. Yeah, this is wool. This is like a more recent wool. Okay, that still happened, but you can see it took me a little bit more effort than it did with the 50-year-old wool. So we have a little bit of black, and you see yarn in different sizes, but you rarely see like different size cakes getting put on it. This gives me the impressions like someone put together the scraps of their kit, or they weighed out the amount of yarn that they needed, and then they wound exactly the amount of yarn that you needed, which means I might regret pulling that like that, but we will find out. We got a nice little bit of yellow. Look at that green. It's like a sage green. Then we got like a brown. It's like a medium brown. Then we have another green. Yeah, it still has that musty smell. If I end up using this yarn, we're definitely gonna have to wash it. And what is this here? It looks like tree bark. I hope it is tree bark and not a moth. It's crumbling like tree bark. We have these two cream colors. All right, so the screen is showing the color that I thought it was going to be, but I can tell you in person it looks a lot more yellow. It's definitely yellowed over time. If I had to replace this, I'd use like my Cascade 220 that I bought for another project that I never ended up using. Then we got this dark green. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 different cakes of yarn. And all the cakes of yarn are different colors with the exception of these two. I guess the thing is now to look at the book. Oh yeah, you can see the book yellowed over time, because you can see that line right there and how white it is here, but how like yellow it is right here. But the yellow follows the path of the cellophane. Let's open this up. Oh! Paper separate. I like it when I'm right. It says 3-ply sport weight yarn. Sport weight is DK. Our girl and flowers are motifs we found on a very famous quilt owned by the Museum of American Fold Art. Happy girls are almost dancing down a hillside, spotted with flowers, while the rest of the sweater carries floral and decorative motifs. A very attractive sweater and fun to knit. Okay. It does have a quilt look to it. I will give it that. It does look a lot like a quilt. The quilting tradition is incredibly strong in classic Americana. Needles size 4 and 6. One set of double pointed needles size 4. What did I say? Gauge 5.5 stitches to 1 inch. 6.5 rows to 1 inch. Just multiply it by 4. So these directions are for a size 40 chest and 27-inch shoulder to bottom of the sweater finish size. To alter size, oh! This is what's surprising to me here. When you look at like a size inclusive pattern that is written nowadays, they include all the sizes in the pattern. When you look at the beginning notes of the pattern, you first look at the measurements and see what size corresponds with the measurement, and then they usually give them like a size. They often follow like extra small, small, large, whatnot. Some of them will choose like size 1 through 9. There's often like 9 sizes if the person's trying to be inclusive. And they will include the stitch counts for all the sizes and all the instructions, and you just have to keep track of where you do it. Some patterns, if they do this for you electronically, they actually give you an option to click on your size and then they'll fill in the numbers for you. This here says, we're only telling you it for one size, and if you're working with any of the other sizes, tough luck, you gotta figure out the math. It's the instructions for sizing. Okay. Yeah, but I see the sizing instructions here, and it is a step-by-step guide for how to do the math. Theoretically, I could just follow the pattern as written. It says that it goes up to size 42. In today's standards, that wouldn't fit plus size. That wouldn't be inclusive to most plus size people. That would just be inclusive up until slightly bigger than me. I'm like 38 inches around here, and I know it can be kind of hard to tell on the internet, but I am basically the average size in general. I'm like 5'7", and I weigh about 160 pounds. So I'm basically the size the world is made for. If the bigger size accommodates me, it's not a size inclusive pattern. But I guess with the size 40 chest though, this part of it is finding out what the ease is of the sweater. Because there's like negative ease where you knit it so that the way the sweater stretches, or if you have positive ease, you make it a little bit bigger so it's oversized and it flows on you. And I mean, 2 inches is a negligible difference. It's followed with a note. It says, do not carry yarn across. Use new yarn for each color change and twist old and new yarns around each other to prevent holes. If I did not see that note, I absolutely would have carried the yarn across. I guess I want to prevent the puckering that's going on. Oh, I was about to say, they didn't mention the materials, but of course they did. They measured it by yards. 100. So each one of these is 400 yards. Because there's 2 whites, and the white just says 800 yards. Yellow, light red, light green, dark green, spruce green, light blue, dark blue, tan, black. Okay, it's official. All the yarn is included. Oh, the instructions should start right here. The front and back are worked separately. I was wrong about that. It was very American of them to have a seam sweater. So the thing that's shocking me now is just the way that the fonts look. I mean, usually there's like a graphic design difference between the materials and the information, and then when you go into the instructions for the pattern, they switched like the formatting. So there's usually like a formatting change between all the stuff you need to know ahead of time and then going to the pattern. But if you look here, it just goes straight from size note right into the sweater. So the sleeves are sewn in. Oh. Hey. Oh my gosh. So it's a black and white chart for a color pattern. There is no legend. It says, see front cover for color location. So you have a kind of approximation, but I mean, this is not a color chart. This is just a picture of the finished thing. They tell you when the colors change. You can see they have all these symbols, which is still a perfectly valid way of doing a chart, especially if you come across someone who wants to do color work but happens to be colorblind. This way they know where the color changes happen, yeah? But they are missing a little explainer box that tells you exactly what the little symbols mean, what colors coordinate with what little symbols. Here also, you can see it's like an outline of her, yeah? But there's no like physical outline. So am I to assume that I just knit the same color up until here? I can tell you with the chart that happens nowadays, anytime there's a color change, every square is getting filled. I've come to the realization that this is going to be much more of a challenge than I was expecting it to be. Becky's going to have to break out the markers. The other thing that they are missing, that I think they actually have a way to account for, is they're missing the numbers that go up along the side. Although I can kind of tell, it's a very faint difference, but I can kind of tell that some of the lines are slightly thicker, and they are slightly thicker in both 5 and 10 row intervals in both directions. So you can count by 5. Part of the thing that like really tipped me off to that is like the lady's face. Another thing that could be strange with me being a product of the 21st century and this pattern being a product of the 20th century is here in 2024, there's a lot more research going into neurodivergency and what that means. So there's a lot more realizing that people's minds work in different ways. When you are in the process of making an accessible knitting pattern nowadays, you have to try to explain it in a way that makes it easier for people to understand your patterns, especially since under the neurodivergency umbrella falls people who experience dyslexia, or they experience like dyscalculia. They have trouble with the numbers, or you may have people who are colorblind and they can't necessarily see what's going on, or you also may have people who have really bad eyesight and they can't see that. You know, if I were to show this to my mom right now, she'd be going like, oh, that's too small for me. I understand why they made it this size, so it would fit with the box. I understand why they would have like not made it a colored chart. It's probably to save money. But I am definitely going to have to sit through here and figure out what the different colors are. Draw my own little chart. And then we have knitting notes. This is just like a generic knitting note thing for the sweaters. It seems like this sweater was originally part of a book. And then when they split the different kits, they just added all the necessary general information separate to that. They just had a bunch of these printed out and they just tossed them in the kits as they came around. Oh my gosh. I was so wrong. What I just discovered is S&C Huber stands for Stephen and Carol Huber, and then it follows with copyright 1990. This makes this not 54 years old, but 34. Put it in perspective, this makes this kit only 3 years older than me. To be fair, I once watched a documentary about the 1990s because I don't remember anything about it, and that was a whole different world. I don't understand how I was alive during that time. I'm not sure I could have been an adult during that time. I'm not sure I can be an adult now. Let's look at these knitting notes before I go into an existential crisis of what being an adult is like in 2024. So we have our abbreviations, which the abbreviations are all abbreviations I've seen before, and they're all pretty standard. That was standardized like over 50 years ago. Tension or gauge. These terms are often used interchangeably. They refer to how tightly or how loosely the knitter is knitting compared with the gauge given in the pattern or by the yarn manufacturer. This is saying like make a swatch. Admit I'm terrible at making the swatch. Pretty much the only times I make a swatch is if I'm like pattern testing. But if I'm making something just for me, I will usually just find the proper size needles and hope that it works. I'm usually good on the width, the length not so much, but the length is the less important part. It's determining and altering size. Determine the size of the garment to knit. Take a chest measurement and add 2 to 4 inches depending on how tight or how loose you want the sweater to fit. I can just follow the instructions there because I know I'm 38 and they have the instructions for 40. Remember, wool tends to stretch a bit, so I have wool. Take measurements for the following: length of the finished garment from underarm, length of the finished garment from middle of shoulder, and length of finished sleeve to underarm. Compare your measurements with those given in the pattern and lengthen or shorten as needed. I mean, that is a good instruction to have. Because the one thing that a lot of these size inclusive patterns nowadays lose track of is not everyone carries their body the same way. Some people have bigger boobs, some people carry it around their tummy, some people have broader shoulders, and not all patterns necessarily fit the knitter's body type, and they'll have to readjust it for them. And giving that instruction is the bare minimum for making sure that it definitely does fit the person's knitting it for. I haven't read her book yet, but there is someone who's prevalent on social media who makes sure that nowadays people can wear her sweaters. I forget her name. I think it's like Tion Designs. I'm gonna link it down in the description box below. She's made it her life's mission to make sure that you can have a sweater that fits you regardless of the size of your body, and she's doing important work. The sizing. So this is like the step-by-step for how to do the math to figure out how to make the sweater fit you, to get the proper size that you need. The stuff that this paragraph is explaining is stuff that a tech editor checks for in a pattern nowadays. It's good that they're explaining this out so you can use it. There are 22 steps And there's an alternative method of adjusting the size is to increase the size of the garment by using bulkier yarns or to decrease the size of the sweater by using finer yarns. Yarn gauge chart shows many different yarns, a needle number, and the number of stitches per inch and the number of rows per inch. This is how you know they just photocopied it from the book, because there's no such chart with this kit. Yeah, again, the patterns in this book are all charted on graphs. I only have the one pattern. It's interesting they don't mention the book that this is from. This is the type of thing where if someone were to try this particular thing nowadays, there is a 50-50 chance that they are going to get copyrighted to oblivion. This company, they still existed, would still get away with it because it's their book. Someone else was making a kit for a pattern that they didn't really have access to from a book. They tried to print it out. Nowadays, they would get copyrighted to oblivion because they're mentioning this book. They don't mention what the book is anywhere. All I know is that there is a goose sweater. I'm definitely going to do more research because do they only have the one book? Yeah, adapting patterns to different sweaters. Many of the patterns of this book lend themselves to more than one sweater shape. But I only have the one sweater shape, so this is useless. It says yarn gauge charts. There's no such chart part of the kit, although nowadays I could easily just look one up online. There are a few general notes on the actual knitting of the sweater. For neater edge, whenever possible, slip the first stitch and knit into the back of the last stitch on every row. Create a neater edge and it'll be easier to sew and match up the pattern. It's the first I'm hearing of knit into the back of the last stitch of every row, but I am a big fan of the slip the first stitch method. It creates a little V along the side. It makes it easier to line up to sew. Do not join yarn in the middle of a row. It usually shows and creates a bulky area. It depends on how you join it. At the beginning of the row with a new ball and then use both ends for sewing seams later. Do not carry the yarn across the back of the sweater when working pattern motifs. This is like almost contradictory to don't join yarn in the middle of a row because the color changes in the middle of a row. Use bobbins or small balls and change yarn with each color change simply by looping the first yarn around the new color and continuing with the new yarn. Important with heavy yarns as they tend to pucker and become bulky. I mean, there is a way to carry the yarn so they don't pucker, although I'm not technically proficient at that yet. That's going to be a lot of work. Sewing together to join the garment together. Use the same yarn it was knitted with. Well, yeah, duh. Use a running stitch and go through each stitch on each side of the seam. It follows with a back stitch makes the seam bulky and an overcast stitch is not as neat. So it looks like they're not a fan of the mattress stitch. Most patterns nowadays would recommend the mattress stitch. For me, the running stitch does not feel as secure as an overcast stitch would, even though the overcast stitch is not as neat, as they say. I am not an expert at the mattress stitch, but I'm wondering if they're thinking of the mattress stitch and calling it a running stitch. I do understand that a back stitch makes the seam bulky, because you're getting a little bit of an extra edge that doesn't need to be pulled to the back. And secure the ends of the seam with a double stitch. It's the first I've heard of that, although usually when it comes to knots, I just fudge it. I make sure it works. It says, do not knot sewing yarns. Weave in all ends 2 or 3 inches before cutting. Yeah, then you gotta really weave in those ends well. Well, I usually don't skimp on that. They have blocking instructions. They want a wet block. Oh, they want it ironed. And then they have washing instructions, which is good. That's the kit. These are still very odd instructions, even compared to books I've gotten from the past. I've been knitting ever since I was 10. That means I learned how to knit in 2003. A lot of the knitting books I looked at and I learned how to knit from that I still own aren't terribly far removed from this particular pattern. And even then, I feel like a lot of the homogenizing of a lot of the formatting kind of came together. This is a type of graph I would expect from a lacework project. It just boggles my mind that they wouldn't include a legend. Instead, just assume that you would see the right color, because I mean, how would you know that it's spruce compared to light green or dark green? See the different colors, but especially since we're really looking at faded, something I know is yellowed a little bit. Especially since it was in the 1990s, they absolutely had access to color printing. They absolutely carried the yarn across the back. You can kind of see the stitches there. And that's like the inside of the sweater. That's the back of this part right here. They absolutely carried the yarn across the back. They just don't want long floats. Oh! I assumed that this, like you can see here, this is like a darker blue versus the lighter blue. I thought that was a mistake. No, that's intentional. That's why there are two different blues. The darker blues on the bottom, the lighter blues on top. I have some more research to do. I have a lot more preparation to do before I can knit this sweater. I think I'm still going to attempt to knit it with the yarn that's available here because I wouldn't use it otherwise. Simply because it's rough. This is definitely the type of sweater where you wear a long sleeve thing underneath it. It's not merino in any way. If I had to guess the breed, Romney, Cordale, Targhee, a rougher, stickier wool. There's absolutely no merino in this whatsoever. They still make yarn this rough though. Part of the problem is going to be figuring out how much yarn to unwind. So I have enough for the individual part, but not so much that I end up causing yarn chicken for myself later. I thought I was going to wear this sweater, but I think this is just going to be more of an experiment sweater. I also have a lot of research to do on this company, so that way I can like fill you guys in on if this company even still exists, like what the name of that book was, and if it's like multiple books. And then I gotta figure out what the darn legend is. Anyway, that was today's entertainment. Have a nice day.